Welcome to Mr. News Art Class. It's wonderful to see your smiling faces. Today we're going to be having fun with clay. First things first, notice that I have taken off my watch and any rings. This is very important because your hands are going to get dirty if you're working with clay. One thing that I like to do is set them aside in a little bowl that I have made for that purpose. This is a pinch pot made out of clay. So I can just set them there, set that aside, and I'll have those handy whenever I need them. There are lots of fun little things that you could create with clay, but before we actually start building anything with clay, we need to have an understanding of what we're actually using. This is Stonex air dry clay. Now this Stonex air dry clay works in your hands very much the same as a lot of earth clays that have to be cooked in a kiln. And this clay will get hard when it is dry, and it does not have to be cooked in an oven or a kiln or anything at all. Once it is dry, it's rock hard. And this just dried overnight, about 24 hours. Also, before we can start making anything out of our clay, we need to understand just a few things about how to work with this stuff. When you have a giant block of clay like this, it usually comes in a plastic bag. Why is it in a plastic bag? Because you don't want it to get dry. Well, oh, clunk. If I take this out of the plastic bag, now I just have basically a big old brick. How do I cut this into smaller, more workable pieces? Because I can't really just like start making something out of this big chunk. A lot of people think, well, you could get out a knife and cut it. This isn't actually a knife, it's a clay cutting tool, but if I like stick this in here and try to cut something, it doesn't really move. It's really hard to move. You can see that the clay is sticking to it and it's hard to move through. So to cut large chunks of clay, we use a wire cutter like this. Now it has handles that you can hold on the two ends. I like to wrap one around one of my hands to make a smaller wire to cut with so I can get more precise. And I'm just gonna wrap it around over here, pull it through, and that cut my clay straight through real quick and easy. That's cool. Now you might be wondering, what's the difference between this clay and something like Play-Doh? Well, clay actually comes out of the ground. Here in Alabama, if I go outside and start digging with a shovel, there's gonna be a couple inches of topsoil where it's like brown dirt, but then underneath that, it's red clay. If you've ever been digging with a shovel and you find red dirt, it's really clay, that's what it is. And different places around the world have different colors and different types of clay. A lot of times you can find clay in the soil, under the soil, near rivers and streams, but really it's abundant all around the planet. Whereas something like Play-Doh is actually made out of food, right? Play-Doh is usually made out of like flour or starch of some kind. It's more of what we would call a dough, just like pizza dough or bread dough or cookie dough. It's made out of food. That doesn't mean you should go eat Play-Doh though. It wouldn't taste good. It's got colors added to it and other chemicals in there that you don't want to be eating. And you probably shouldn't go eating a lump of clay either. It's dirt. It just, no. Anyway, I don't know why I'm talking about eating. We should be talking about sculpting. There are a couple of things about this clay that we need to understand before we work with it. Things about how this clay works. So before you get out a lump of clay and start working, we need to understand what other tools we're going to need and why we're going to need them and how we're going to need to use them. So you're going to need some kind of scoring tool. Now this is just a plastic knife-looking tool that came out of a clay supply kit. But really all I need to be able to do with this is scratch the surface of the clay. I'm not going to be using it to try to like cut the clay in half. I'm also going to need some kind of water cup. Now I've just got this little condiment cup, little ketchup cup full of water. And you really don't need much water. As a matter of fact, one of the things that you really don't want to do is you don't want to go and get your hands too wet and get the clay all wet, because then it just gets all slimy and muddy all over your hands. Ugh, and it's really hard to hold. It's slippery, slimy, and it's really hard to make anything out of it because it just slides around. And on the flip side, you also don't want it to be too dry because it gets crumbly and hard to work with if it's too dry. And if you leave it out overnight, then it'll turn hard as a rock. So the best thing is to keep your clay in some kind of a Ziploc bag until you are ready to actually make something out of it. And one last thing before we get started here, the only time you actually need the cup of water is if you're going to be building something where you're connecting different pieces together, which we will be doing in this lesson. So let's start by learning that skill. If we have two chunks of clay, whatever, doesn't matter what they are, and we want to put them together to make a sculpture. Well, I just stick them together, right? I just go and stick them together and they're done, right? They're sticky, so they stick together, right? Wrong. So here's the problem. It's still two separate pieces. And if I stick these two together and then let it dry overnight, then tomorrow morning, they're just gonna come back apart because it's two separate pieces, and when they're dry, they're not sticky, right? Here I have some dry clay and it's not sticky at all. So, in order to stick two chunks of clay together, we have to use a process called scoring and slipping, okay? Now, this is just for demonstration purposes. I don't actually really need these two pieces to be connected, but here's what it means to score and slip. For starters, you use something, anything. If you don't have a clay tool like this, you could use an old pencil, you could use a stick, it doesn't matter. And you just scratch the surface where you want the two pieces to connect, right? So if I want these two to connect right here, I need to scratch the surface on one or both. It's best to do both, but sometimes you only need to do one. And you can see it looks almost like I just made checkerboards there. Then we slip the clay. That's called scoring, what we've already done. Scoring just means scratching the surface, and then slip is like you can think of it like clay glue. It's a really wet, sticky clay. To make that, what we're gonna do is we're gonna put one fingertip into our water, just one little drop of water, and rub that in. We might need a second drop, but we're doing it one drop at a time. One drop of water, rub that in. It should make kind of a thick paste there. You don't want it to be too wet and runny. We do that on both pieces. Really, just one drop of water usually does the trick. Did I stick my whole hand in the water? No. Look, it's just that one fingertip that got a little bit wet. Now, that fills those little grooves. That slip acts like glue, it acts like cement and glues these two pieces together. So now I can press these two together and you can start to see that slippy, squishy stuff oozing out the edges, just like if you were to press two papers together with glue in between them. And that, if I leave it like that overnight, it will be one solid piece tomorrow morning because that slip will harden the two pieces together. Okay, so that's cool, but are we using big chunks to just make a lump today? No. Today, what we're gonna be making is a coil pot. A coil pot. You notice it's like a cylinder-shaped pot made out of lots of little snake-looking shapes, right? Now, these ones have been drying for a day or two now. They're nice and hard. And there's really two main parts to this. There's the bottom, which is basically just a cookie shape. It's just a flattened pancake shape. And then the rings around the sides, which are not, I mean, if I were to hold it like this and just look at it like that, it almost looks like it's just more of those cookie shapes, but notice that it's empty, it's hollow on the inside. So what we need to do for those is roll out a bunch of coils. Let me show you how to do that. So what you want today is a lump of clay about this size, you know, maybe 2 inches by 1 inch by 1 inch-ish. And we're gonna need to start by splitting it in two. Now, if I just try to pull, it's not gonna work. What I need to do is twist. Watch, I'm gonna grab by both sides and twist. And then it comes right apart. Okay, I've got a paper plate that I'm working on so that I don't make a mess of my table here. I'm gonna set one of those lumps aside. And with this other lump, I need to make a cookie shape for the base, for the bottom, a cookie shape. So how do I do that? Well, I hold out one hand, place my clay in the middle of that hand, other hand on top, and roll in circles. If I go back and forth, that's gonna make coils, which we'll be doing later. We don't want that right now. We want a cookie. To start the cookie, we need a ball that we can flatten into a pancake. Now, I do have to kind of press together with both hands, squeeze together with both hands while I'm rolling in circles to make a ball. If I'm just lazy rolling, it's not going to do anything. I have to kind of press, I have to push a little while I'm rolling in circles and it's making a ball. Did I put it on my plate and roll it around there to make a ball? No, because then it would stick to the plate. Did I put it on the table and roll it there to make a ball? No, because then it would stick to the table. We don't want to do that. Work the clay in your hands. Roll it into a ball. Once you have rolled it into a ball, smash it flat in your hands. Did I put it on the plate and smash it there? No, because then it would stick to the paper plate and it would have paper plate all over it. I'd try to peel it off and it would just rip the plate. Did I smash it into the table? No, because then it would just stick to the table and getting that up would be an absolute nightmare. So I'm squishing it between my hands. Now, what I like to do, it's not quite flat, so what I like to do is use my crab claw pincher hands to just kind of squeeze it until it's about the thickness of a pencil, maybe a little bit thinner. I don't want it to be as thin as like a sheet of paper. That would be way too thin. It would be fragile. You want it to have enough thickness that it will, you know, maintain its shape and not be too fragile. But if it's too thick, then it won't dry properly and it'll just crumble apart when it dries. So a cookie, think about like you know, cookie size. I'm gonna set that down for a minute. And then with the other lump of clay, I'm gonna start rolling out some coils. Now, if I just roll this back and forth to make a coil, then it's gonna be way too long. So I'm gonna tear off a chunk. Again, to tear off a chunk, you twist, okay? If you just try to pull, it's not gonna work as well. And to roll a coil, I put a lump of clay. I'll start with a chunk here. Put a chunk of clay in your hand, put your other hand on top and roll forward and backward, forward and backward. And as you do that, it makes a wormy shape, right? Or a snake. That's in the art world, we call that a coil. And again, you want these coils to be about as thick as a pencil. And you notice that as I'm rolling it between my hands, it's kind of hanging and dangling. and that chunk is still big, but where I've been rolling it between my fingers is getting smaller. I need to move it and roll where it's thick. I need to squeeze while I roll, and I'm looking at it and feeling it to make sure that I'm getting the thick parts rolled out thinner, okay? And there I have like a long, snaky, wormy shape. What I'm gonna do with that is I'm gonna wrap it around on top of the cookie shape. Just spiral it around. Now, if I, you know, here I've got it, it's so long it wraps around more than one whole time. I could just layer it, just let it go on top of itself, or I could do something fancy with the end here, like roll it into a spiral and have little designs there. There's really no wrong way to do it. I could just pinch and tear it right there so that it just makes one layer at a time. You decide. You decide. But is that stuck on, right? It's stuck on, right? Except wait, we learned a minute ago that we have to score and slip, or else when this dries, that coil is just gonna come right off. We don't want those coils to come off, we want them to stay together when it dries. This one's dry, and those are all stuck together because I scored and slipped. So I'm gonna go around the edges of this, or around this, or both. And what I'm gonna do is just scratch the surface, make little scratch marks where it's going to connect. Do I need that in the middle here? No, because this coil isn't gonna be connecting in the middle. It's gonna be connecting around the top, around the edge, around the top here. All right. And then once I have scored that surface, how many fingers do I put in my water? Do I stick my whole hand in the water? No. One fingertip, just the tip dipped into that water. I don't need a whole lot of water. It'll maybe take 2 or 3 little dips into the water. I'm just trying to make it into a slippery, slimy, gluey kind of surface there. And then I can't just rest this on top. I have to kind of squeeze it down into it a little bit. I'm not like squeezing, trying to pinch it flat. I'm just gently pressing them together. And you can see as I gently press them together, these little bubbles of slip, that glue stuff coming out the edges, right? Okay, gently press those together. And then we're gonna repeat those steps over and over again until we run out of clay, all right? So I'm gonna take this lump of clay, I'm gonna roll it into a coil. I'm gonna make sure that it's the same thickness all the way down, right? Over here it's way thinner, and then up here it's thicker, so I'm gonna squeeze the thick part, roll it out until the whole thing is about the thickness of a pencil, maybe a little bit thinner than a pencil. And then I just wrap it around on here and stick it together, right? And I'm done, right? No. What do I have to do? That's right. I have to score and slip. Score and slip. So I'm gonna score the top surface of this. And then I'm gonna get one fingertip into the water, and it's just the tip of the finger. Did I stick my whole finger down in there? No, just one tip of the finger into the water, maybe 2 or 3 drops rubbing into those grooves. And then I can press these two together. Again, gently pressing it on top. Notice that it's starting to form a little bowl in the middle, a little pot. We call this a coil pot because it is a little clay pot made out of coils, or these long snaky shapes, right? Each time you add a layer, it'll get a little bit taller. So I'll take what's left of my clay here. I'll roll another coil. Again, trying to get the whole thing an even thickness. I guess I got one end a little bit thinner than the other end, but that's okay. What I'm going to do is just kind of fold that under. There we go. And I'm done, right? Except no, what do I have to do between these two layers? I have to score and slip. Take your clay tool or your old pencil or whatever you're using to scratch the surface of the clay. What that does is it makes little grooves that the slip fills into. You can think of those little grooves acting like suction cups to pull the two pieces of clay together. And then you can think of the slip like glue or cement holding the two pieces together. Just a couple little drops of water, one at a time. You don't want to overdo it. And then we'll lay this on top. And we'll squeeze it gently together. There you go. Now that is a very shallow, very short pinch pot. The more clay you have, the taller you can make it. I've made a couple here that are different heights so you can see. It just takes more clay to make it taller. Another way you can make it taller is if your cookie that you started with is not as wide, then you take smaller coils to wrap around it so you can build it up taller. And that could be used just like this little pinch pot bowl to hold, you know, jewelry, things like that, watches, whatever. Now, no matter what you have made with your clay, if you have been using the same Stonex self-drying, air-drying clay that I've been using, a very important thing to remember is that, yes, this is hard as a rock. No matter what you've made, it's hard as a rock. But if you try to go pour water into this, it's going to turn back into mud. So don't let these sculptures get wet. If you wanted to, you could paint the outsides and the insides. You could spray it with a clear acrylic sealer to make it last a little longer. But if you have made things properly, then it should be hard as a rock, and it should last forever as long as you don't get it wet. I hope you have enjoyed making your coil pots with me today, and I can't wait to see you in the next lesson.